Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's top stories. The Arab League summit kicks off in Kuwait City as Syria's opposition chief urges Arab leaders to pressure the international community to supply rebels with advanced weapons. Maronite Patriarch Bashar al-Assad urges rival parties to dissociate Lebanon from the regional and international turmoils, demanding officials to end the chaos in the country. In two separate incidents, a Syrian woman in Tripoli and a man in Bekaa set themselves on fire, leading to severe treatments in separate hospitals. Syrian Maryam Abdul Qadir, also known as Maryam Khawla, set herself on fire in front of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency headquarters in Tripoli in protest against the poor aid being presented to Syrian refugees in Lebanon. A number of people at the scene soon came to her aid and put out the fire. Maryam, aged 40, has since been transported to Al Salam Hospital. Meanwhile, in the Bekaa region, Fawzi Nakhli, the owner of a gas station who was forced to close his business, also set himself on fire. The incident happened after internal security forces closed down his station in Ana, the western Bekaa region. Civil defense teams soon headed to the scene to put out the blaze. Nakhli was taken to Shtura Hospital for treatment. An officer at the scene was lightly injured in the incident, and he has since then been taken to Farhat Hospital for treatment. President Michel Sleiman reiterates his complete rejection to any attempt to extend his 6-year term, ruling out that Hezbollah will allow it. He expresses belief that Hezbollah will block attempts to extend his term, wondering how the party will approve it after the recent stances he took recently. Sleiman voiced hope that the political opponents will reach common grounds over the name of the new president, who should be a consensual president. The new president should adhere to the Babda Declaration and seek to implement it in order to safeguard the national sovereignty. Sleiman considers that his stances aim at restoring the balance in the country, particularly after Hezbollah became involved in the crisis in neighboring Syria. On the upcoming national dialogue session set to be held on March 31st and Hezbollah's decision to boycott it, Sleiman says the party didn't inform him about this decision. Sources say that Hezbollah will not attend all party talks as it prefers to participate in a session headed by a new president other than Sleiman. Speaker Nabih Berri says he hopes the election of a new president will take place during one parliamentary session. He also hopes he will not be forced to call parliament to session to elect a president several times, as had happened for the election of President Michel Sleiman. Berri has formed a committee comprised of his development and liberation bloc to hold consultations with Lebanon's rival parties on the upcoming presidential polls. The consultations will kick off after March the 25th in conjunction with talks that he will hold with the same sides to guarantee the appropriate atmosphere to hold a parliamentary session. Sleiman's 6-year term ends in May, but the constitution states that the parliament should start meeting after March the 25th to elect a new head of state. No one has yet officially announced his candidacy for the top post, but there are several contenders from the rival March 8 and 14 camps. Maronite Patriarch Bashar al-Assad urges rival parties to dissociate Lebanon from the regional and international turmoils, demanding officials to end the chaos in the country. Al-Ra'i states during a mass he held in Kirki on the occasion of the Annunciation of the Virgin Mary that the political, economic, social and security chaos in the country should end. The Patriarch stresses the importance of swiftly staging the first round of the presidential elections in order to give time to choose a president capable of assuming his national responsibilities. Al-Ra'i considers that Lebanon is passing through difficult crises as the presidential elections are coming up. Saudi Arabia's crown prince says the international community has betrayed Syrian rebels by failing to arm them against the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. He was referring to unkept promises by several nations to arm fighters battling to topple the Assad government. He also called on the Arab League to speed up the handover of Syria's seat in the 22-member organization to the opposition National Coalition in order to give it formal status that could cement its recognition by world powers. The seat vacated after the Arab League suspended Syria's membership over the conflict was promised to the opposition at last summit in Doha. For its part, Kuwait urges Arab leaders to end multiple disputes complicating crises, such as Syria's war and political turmoil in Egypt. The meeting is expected to agree on more humanitarian action in response to Syria's war, which has put a severe strain on neighboring states hosting refugees. The meeting will also discuss other regional challenges, such as Iran, which has improved its long frosty ties with Western powers since the election of President Hassan Rouhani. For his part, Syrian opposition chief Ahmed al-Jarba urges Arab leaders in Kuwait to pressure the international community to supply rebels with advanced weapons that would tip the balance of power on the ground. He also urges Arabs to give Syria's Arab League seat to the opposition and hand them Syria's embassies in their countries. In his address, al-Jarba called on Arab leaders to pressure the international community to commit to its promises to supply sophisticated weapons to Syria's revolutionaries. Al-Jarba slammed keeping Syria's seat empty at the Arab summit after it was granted to the opposition last year in Doha, saying this would send a message to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad that he can kill his own people with impunity. The Arab League states that it will keep the seat vacant until the Syrian opposition completes certain legal requirements. As a result, al-Jarba addressed a summit in Kuwait City but was not allowed to speak from the spot reserved for Syria. And coming up next, relatives of the passengers on board the Malaysian flight MH370 demand answers for the cause of the crashed plane. That and more after the break. The death sentences handed out by an Egyptian court against 529 supporters of the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood have sparked widespread outrage and international condemnation. Rights groups, the United States and the European Union expressed concern and questioned the fairness of proceedings against so many defendants lasting just 2 days. The largest mass sentencing in the country's history was a sharp escalation of a crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood that the military-installed government has declared a terrorist organization. Monday's sentences in the central city of Minya were related to the death of a policeman and other violence that took place across the country since July, when the army overthrew Egypt's first freely elected president, Mohamed Morsi, of the Muslim Brotherhood. Nearly 700 other Muslim Brotherhood supporters, including Mohamed Badia, the supreme guide of the movement, were due in court today. U.S. President Barack Obama and major industrialized allies have warned Russia it faces damaging economic sanctions if President Vladimir Putin takes further action to destabilize Ukraine following the seizure of Crimea. Leaders of the group of 7 nations meeting without Russia agreed to hold their own summit this year instead of attending a planned G8 meeting in the Russian Olympic venue of Sochi along the Black Sea coast of Crimea, and to suspend their participation in the G8 until Russia changes course. They also agreed their energy ministers will work together to reduce dependence on Russian oil and gas and increase energy security. The G7 leaders, who met on the sidelines of a nuclear security summit in The Hague, said they will convene again in Brussels in early June, the first time since Russia joined the G8 in 1998, that it will have been shut out of the annual summit of industrialized democracies. They also urged the International Monetary Fund to reach a rapid agreement with Ukraine to unlock urgently needed financial aid for the country's shattered economy. Relatives of Chinese passengers on board flight MH370 have scuffled with security personnel as they descended on Malaysia's embassy in a rare protest, weeping as they demanded answers on the crashed plane. The protest comes after Malaysia's Prime Minister Najib Razak announced that the plane crashed in the Indian Ocean after vanishing from civilian radar screens on March the 8th. The Malaysian government and Malaysia Airlines have been criticized on social media platforms, especially in China, over the lack of physical evidence to support the Prime Minister's announcement. All 239 people on board were presumed dead, and around 2/3 of those were Chinese. Families accused Malaysian authorities of concealing information, cheating the families, and wasting valuable time during the search. Some families were also notified via text message, which was deemed insensitive. Search parties say they will continue the search for debris with sophisticated devices. China demands that Kuala Lumpur hand over the satellite data, which led it to conclude that the Beijing-bound Malaysia Airlines flight crashed at sea and that none of the people on board survived. And now for news around the world in brief. Suicide bombers and gunmen attacked an election commission office beside the home of Afghan presidential candidate Ashraf Ghani al-Ahmadazai. and engage in a lengthy gun battle with security forces less than 2 weeks before the presidential polls, more than 3 hours after the initial explosions in the western Darul-Aman area of the Afghan capital. Sporadic gunfire could still be heard in the area, which had been cordoned off by police. At least 30 people have been killed as a double-decker bus carrying municipal workers on a field trip plunged off a steep road into a ravine in western Thailand. Officials say 22 people were injured in the crash that occurred when the driver tried to pass other cars on a steep, winding mountain road. The driver, who survived the accident with a broken rib, says he tried to slow down the bus but claimed brakes stopped working. A sailor was fatally shot and killed at Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia, and security forces have killed the male civilian suspect. A spokeswoman says the shooting happened aboard the USS Manhattan, a Navy destroyer. She adds that the two killed were both males and could not say if the civilian had permission to be aboard the ship. No other injuries were reported. Air pollution kills about 7 million people worldwide every year, with more than half of the fatalities due to fumes from indoor stoves, according to a new report from the World Health Organization. The agency says air pollution is the cause of about 1 in 8 deaths and has now become the single biggest environmental health risk. One of the main risks of pollution is that tiny particles can get deep into the lungs, causing irritation. Scientists also suspect air pollution may be to blame for inflammation in the heart, leading to chronic problems or even a heart attack.
Smog in the city for the 6th straight day. A dense grey pall shrouds China's capital. Many commuters wear masks. The World Health Organization says it must be seen as a crisis.
Of course, on days where pollution levels reach or even exceed the scale, we are very concerned, and we have to see this as a crisis. A crisis means that we need to take immediate action to protect ourselves. So on these days, of course, we have to recommend that people don't go outside to have physical activities. They stay inside, keep children inside to the extent possible to protect them from the possible negative health effects that we have.
Smog levels in Beijing reached 469 on Tuesday morning. Pollution readings measuring the number of unhealthy particles in the air higher than 300 are considered hazardous by the WHO. Still, the warnings didn't stop some people from staying outdoors.
I feel that if I went outside today without my mask, it would be very difficult. I really worry about people's health. For instance, look at these retirees. They have nothing to do but come here and dance or exercise. If you participate in these sorts of activities outside when you're older, it's even worse for your body to be breathing it, right?
Pollution is an increasing concern for China's leaders, as affluent city residents turn against its previous growth at all costs economic model that has damaged much of the country's air, water and soil.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. The Arab League summit kicks off in Kuwait City as Syria's opposition chief urges Arab leaders to pressure the international community to supply rebels with advanced weapons. Maronite Patriarch Shadarai urges rival parties to dissociate Lebanon from the regional and international turmoils, demanding officials to end the chaos in the country. And in 2 separate incidents, a Syrian woman in Tripoli and a man in the Bekaa set themselves on fire, leading to severe treatments in separate hospitals. Those were today's headlines from us here at Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, wishing you all a very nice evening.